All right, thank you. Glad to be here. Who's seen a TED Talk before? Yeah, pretty much universal. So when they ask you to do a TED Talk, there's no pressure because nobody knows what that is, right? Expectations are like here, and so say, can you come in and do a TED Talk? Well, sure, we can bound it by 18 minutes and see what happens for 18 minutes, and we'll go with the flow. So privileged to be here, a great opportunity to engage in the discussion. I think it's really meaningful as an industry to engage in the discussion. As mentioned, Chief Innovation Officer for Bechtel. It's a role that's existed for the last 2 years, so it's fairly new to the organization. Just to ground people as to the size and magnitude of Bechtel, because it is relevant as I talk about innovation, disruption, and technology adoption in large organizations. So Bechtel, if you didn't know it, is a 120 years old, privately owned company, 5th generation of family leadership, and we specialize in the complex major programs that are the subject of much of the discussion today. So across the globe, internationally, ring-fence projects to distributed projects in climates that are unfriendly in some instances, and in other cases very challenging because they're right in the public atmosphere. So why does that matter? Well, as you talk about driving innovation and adoption in a large organization, there's some challenges, not only for the major program, but for changing the culture of an organization. So I'm going to share a story of a failed technology deployment, key learning that resulted from that. The DeLorean's just a distraction, just so you know. I'm just trying to make the connection. There's zero connection. So it's a TED Talk, right? Slide, it's just a distraction. So talk about a failed technology deployment, key learning, a shift in focus in how we thought about driving technology, and how that's now resulted in successful deployments in scaling across the organization. So as we talk about scale, what we're finding really drives scale, and it actually resonates and ties a great deal to what we've talked about already today and this morning. So I think it's all pretty foundational. So we're going to go back in time. That is the connection. There was a connection to the DeLorean. I'm going to go back a few years. We all know the productivity curves. We've seen it. Simplified it to make it super simple. I think we understand the gap is there, and it's something that's troubled the industry for a long time. These are U.S. numbers, but you give a sense of everything else has improved, construction has declined. What does that mean when it comes to a job site? Just making it super simple, and this is representative. Back in 2001, it would have taken about 1,000 people to work on this project, and in 2012, it would take 1,300. So a 30% growth. Now, there's a lot of reason for that. You start looking at what drives that. I'll talk a little bit about in a couple of minutes around the digital front end of project execution has been fantastic, but it actually has driven a lot more analog documentation in the field at the work phase. So because we had the ability to do, we actually did, and it actually drove lower productivity because we had greater requirements in the field for our workforce. So one of the things we talk a lot about is time on tools and time at work phase. That's fundamental. And how do you drive that? Well, digital on the front end has actually decreased time on tools, and so how do we shift that dynamic and change it back? So we have a massive opportunity, and there's this magical moment back in 2010, 2011. I don't know if folks recall it. This device was released. Big unveiling, lots of excitement. This thing is going to solve all of our problems in the industry. All we need to do is get a bunch of these and get them out to the field. It's going to solve all the problems. The launch of this device, it's a device problem. We're going to solve it with a device. We're going to put it out in the field, give it to our builders, and everything is going to be fixed, right? Anybody else see that same trend happen in their organization? What happened? What was the result of this? Well, we expected that the digital input would manifest itself in the digital experience at the work phase. We thought that it was as simple as we've been doing modeling forever. It's just going to be simply available at the work phase with this device. Content, I'm not so worried about content. You just put the device out there and it's going to work. We were so excited about this, we said this device is going to allow us to innovate in the field at the work phase where it belongs, which the thing I agree with that statement is that's where innovation belongs within this industry. It belongs at the work phase in the field at the point of execution because that's what's going to fundamentally change productivity and it's going to reshape that curve. A ton of excitement. We're quoted, promotional videos, lots of enthusiasm. Ends up on the bookshelf, ends up on the desk, ends up back under paper. So what happened? We had the device. It was a device problem. We were going to solve it with the deployment of a device, and all of the productivity is going to be addressed? Well, you step back and say, okay, well, what's the scenario? We have this design model. So Mario represents our design model. For the last 30 years, we've been putting more and more detail into it. We've been enhancing it with scope and now time and cost. We've been refining it, adding more equipment, more objects. We've spent 30 years developing a highly designed and highly detailed and colored and shaded model. Why can't we use it in the field? What's the problem? Well, what we missed is between that design model and the field, we still had documentation. We had this highly digital, highly detailed model, but to translate it to the field, you'd print it out. How does that make sense? You got a model that you're going to print to issue to deliver objects to the field, and so when you get to the field, you're still dealing with paper. You still have a document-based workflow. You've done the digital up front, you converted it to analog, and then you try to reconvert it to digital. Well, that seems somewhat crazy, right? I mean, does it sound crazy to anybody else? So we end up with this guy in the field. So we're sending our builders out with a pixelated version of the detail and information and say, hey, we're actually giving you more, but it's more pixelated than you've ever had in the past, and we're giving you more control, and we've designed more solutions to control and manage our builders than empower our builders, and now we have a pixelated version of the information at the work face. So they go back to the trailer. No surprise, right? Let's go back. The device didn't work. Let's go back to the trailer. Let's go back to the drawing boards. Let's go back to what we've known and the experience that has worked for a number of years. Go back to the document. Let's not go from digital to document to digital. Let's go from digital to document because it's worked. Let's go back to the trailer. Let's go back to walking 10,000 steps a day. Now, I know there's a lot of health benefit to walking 10,000 steps, but you really don't want your builder, you really don't want your craftsmen and women walking from the work face 10,000 steps every day, back to the information, back to the work face, back to the information. That's inherently wasteful. So when you talk about time on tools, that's all waste. When you talk about Lean and Six Sigma, that's all waste. And in some cases, this is an extreme example, we had people walking 12 miles a day. What's 12 miles a day? They're not at the work face advancing the wrench time or the physical construction because we're still operating in a document-centric environment where the information is not available at the work face. So how do we think about this differently? What can we do? We'll fast forward a couple years, move forward in time a few years. Young professional Chris, who is a construction operations manager in our oil and gas business, he and a team were empowered by his manager to think differently about construction. And they were challenged by our COO, you need to go improve productivity by 30%, and you need to think about it differently. So Chris and the team, empowered, and they had the space, and they had the freedom to think differently about the problem at hand, and they stepped back and say, what really is happening as we try to address productivity? They discovered the key learning, which is really novel and simple when you think about it, is forever we have deployed solutions to manage and control the craft more effectively, the builders more effectively. They flipped the model and said, what can we do to deliver content and resources that can allow the builder to operate more efficiently and effectively, to manage themselves, to manage their resources, to call time for tools and equipment when they need it, and to flag constraints, to flip the power dynamic from being controlled to being empowered to flag constraints and get the work face addressed. So that was the philosophical or the shift in thinking, but it led them to say, okay, everybody's used to a desktop. We know the computer hasn't been rejected. So what if we just moved it quite simply closer to the work face? We're not going to change the what and how of execution. We're going to change the where. We're just going to start with a simple, let's change the where because we know the computer works. And so they said, well, can we put a computer in a job box? And this is a couple years ago, so this is not earth-shattering. And he'd been given the space and the support to question and to challenge that simple idea. And all he needed now was the resources, the ability to go experiment and develop a solution that we could deploy in the organization. And it happened at about this time we launched the Future Fund, which is our approach to funding innovation within the organization and investing in idea exploration, idea prototyping, idea discovery. It doesn't have to work up front, so I think we talked a little bit about this earlier today, but investing in the exploration of ideas so we can deliver mature innovation to our job site. So Chris had this idea. Let's put a computer in a job box, space and time, to invest in that idea. We provided the resources from the Future Fund, said, oh, I don't know if it's going to work, I'm not sure what it's going to look like, but go give it a shot, go try. They partnered with Canac and came up with a data vault, which folks may or may not have seen now. Simply a computer in a job box on wheels that have whiteboards for teams to gather around in the field close to the work face. And keep in mind, our job sites are linear and distributed, so they're not all buildings. But these are able to go out into the field and move with the work face and allow users to access the information, the content, the way they have always done, but not in a trailer at the work face. Now, we went through a couple iterations of this. The first version of this didn't have weatherproofing. Yeah, I don't know who's taking their computer outside to see what happens when it rains, but it doesn't go well, right? So version 2.0, weatherproofing. You can imagine in the heat and sun, there's a bit of an issue with glare. So version 3.0 had the cover, the screen, so that it blocked out the sun. And these things have been virally adopted across the organization. We have hundreds of these deployed. We can't keep up with the demand because it's changed the dynamic. They now have access to content right near the work face. They can have team meetings right at the work face. They're steps away, not 10,000 steps, they're steps away from the work face, and so it is changing the productivity time on our job site. They're so effective that we had lines of people at these to get access to it, and so on some of our jobs, this was just their own doing, decided to bundle these things into data pods. So they put multiple units together. So yeah, it looks like a trailer, but it's a trailer right at the work face, and it can move with the craft and with the teams. It didn't stop there. So the team went back and said, well, you know, I like the idea, it's working great. What if we cannibalized it? It's only been around for 6 months. What if we totally scrapped it and went back to the drawing board and did something entirely different? You know, the data vault is great, but you're only limited to have one group of people at it at one time. Could you get more people around it? You know, you got to go up, you got to take off your gloves, which is a safety concern on some job sites, and you got to work at a keyboard with a mouse, which not super effective. So what if you could touch it? What if you could have a big screen in a box that you can touch and manipulate with your gloves on, so you don't have to take your gloves off, and have multiple people at it with multiple sides and multiple users. So they decided to go do it. Again, they had the time, they had the support, they had the space, and they had the resources to go experiment and cannibalize something that hadn't existed for very long to come up with a new model, double-sided. I can't show you what's inside it because this is a Bechtel version, but trust me, it's awesome. It's pretty amazing. But now you look at the wheels. So the first thing on the earlier version, it was a pain in the neck to wheel around on a job site that's not paved. This has got robust wheels. One person can drag it along and follow the work face. It's now a hotspot. So all you got to do is get connectivity, whether it's through a microwave or through fiber to this, and it creates a hotspot right near the work face for other deployment and other solutions. So this is now being deployed across our global footprint to bring the work face and information closer together. Now, what made this more achievable recently, and we talked a little bit about this earlier, information trends are really empowering a lot of questioning and a lot of thinking about how do we approach productivity and construction execution differently. And I'll just go cruise through these pretty quickly. We talked, I think this actually came up earlier, around the processing power and the memory. Memory is essentially free now with the cloud storage. Processing power just in our smart devices is amazing. The ability to edge compute that's quickly coming on the scene. More and more of the compute power is going to be closer and closer to the work face, and this allows us to do a lot more with AI, with data, with machine learning. The other part of it is the ubiquity, the connectedness of the internet that's out there. This is an issue. I think as 5G continues to roll out, it will become even more and more prevalent. So the need for applications to be offline and online won't be an issue. Everybody will have access to content and have information directly where they're at and allow them to do a lot more things like we're seeing. Ease of use, this is really important, especially for the construction industry. I think that we have focused too long on function and not on the ease of use and experience and in the intuitiveness. And so by shifting the thinking as to who the consumer is, the builder is the consumer of the product and solution, how do we make that easy and intuitive? We should quit thinking of it as a trapped market and think of it as a consumer market, much like Silicon Valley does. How do we look at our builders as consumers of the product and design content that can be virally adopted and not forced adoption, which is inherently more expensive and less efficient? The thing that I think has been the most impactful trend, that if we harness it, it can unleash a lot of adoption, is the interest factor. How do we design content? So if you look at the shift in interest and the detail over the last 60 years. How do we design content that's interesting, that it's actually a positive experience? Why does it have to be painful to fill out a form on a job site to status work that's complete? Why does it have to suck? I mean, so how do we change that? I mean, seriously, why does it have to be? So I think the biggest thing that we are failing at doing is, as we digitize the document-centric workflow. How does that make sense? We're going to make digital forms that look exactly like the document forms. We're not going to totally re-envision the process. And I think it came up on the panel. It's a really opportune time to step back from the process and think about it wholly differently and design a digital process that really optimizes the experience for the workforce. So we've done this, and we've stepped back and in the last couple years started to develop solutions that are targeted to the builder and to the consumer. Just the summary and the trends, so if you want to see these, we've talked about these. We've taken these, we've brought them together with this concept of the builder first thinking and designed content now. So this is content for the device and the technology that is tailored towards the builder. So we have a Bechtel production system. All of these tools are not structured to manage or control the builders more effectively. They're all tailored towards the builder experience at the workface to allow them to manage their resources, request tools and equipment and material on demand, and effectively deliver their scope more productively. And we're seeing viral adoption of this to the point that they want more devices to use their content on. And so we had this failed deployment of tablets up front because we thought it was a tablet device problem, created content and shifted the focus to the builder, provided content and a data-centric workflow, and now they want tablets. And now we can't keep up. Now it's tablets, it's smartphones, it's wearables, it's how can I get to these tools that you've provided to help me be more productive with the work. So no longer are we kicking these out and demanding them to be used, we've provided a reason to use them and change the experience. And you can see here, this is a map of all of our scaled innovation across the enterprise. It's about 6 months old. The point here is that because we've now shifted focus to the consumer or the builder, solutions are being virally adopted and spreading across our global footprint. Everything from use of AR and VR to applications that are targeted to physical innovation to the data vaults and the base camps that you saw. We can't keep up with demand because it's actually affecting the builder's experience in a positive way. So I'll leave you with a couple of thoughts. Leverage the trends. I think now is an incredibly exciting time. Become data-centric. And I know we talk about the digital transformation. I don't like the word transformation because transformation infers there's a stop. I think that it's a never-ending data-centric journey. It's not going to slow down. It's just how do we continue to take that approach. There's no end to the transformation. It's a continuous thing. Focus on the user, the consumer, the builder. Identify who that is for your project or for your teams and deliver content that they can use to help them affect their role. And invest in exploration. The worst thing we can do is try to drive solutions that are certain for success without exploring and adapting and understanding how they might best fit for our industry. So with that, so the problem with having lots of slides is he thinks I'm just clicking too fast, so I apologize. So it's a journey, and one more, last one. So we're trying to provide a lot more for a lot less, in effect, safer, better, faster, leaner execution by the trends, the focus on the consumer, and the drive to data-centric. So I appreciate the time and the opportunity to engage.